Honestly, I am just so incredibly drained from dealing with people who have, literally nothing better to do than police driveways. I mean, the sheer amount of energy it takes to fight a laminated $500 pink slip fluttering under a windshield wiper it's exactly why I had to build sovereign justice in the first place, I guess. Let's just dive right into the madness. Have you ever met a man with so little actual, real-world power that he feels the absolute, desperate need to squeeze every single pathetic drop of misery out of the microscopic amount of authority he does possess? Picture this. The Arizona sun is beating down on the asphalt so hard you can literally see the heat waves shimmering off the pavement, distorting the pristine, cookie-cutter beige stucco houses of the Desert Mirage Estates. My driveway is radiating heat like a pizza oven, lowering by baking the soles of my work boots. And right in front of me, reflecting off the blinding white paint of my perfectly legally parked Ford Transit van, are the strobe-like, headache-inducing red and blue lights of not one, but two Scottsdale Police Department cruisers. Standing to my left, hyperventilating so hard his tucked-in pastel yellow polo shirt is practically vibrating, is Richard. He's clutching a clipboard like it's a flotation device and pointing a trembling, sun-spotted finger at the side of my van. He is screaming something about property values, decent society, and child endangerment. The two cops are just staring at the van. One of them has his hand resting on his duty belt, but his shoulders are shaking. He's laughing. He is trying so incredibly hard to hide it, but he is laughing straight into his radio mic. I'm just standing there, holding a freshly printed stack of federal legal statutes, sipping an iced coffee, and enjoying the absolute destruction of a tyrant's ego. But to fully appreciate the absolute poetry of this moment, to really understand how a guy with a tape measure and a table saw managed to legally traumatize an HOA president with a spray-painted van, we have to rewind exactly 3 weeks. My name is Jack, and I am a custom carpenter. I don't build houses from the ground up. I do the intricate stuff. Custom built-in bookshelves, floating entertainment centers, high-end kitchen island retrofits. I work with my hands, I sweat for a living, and I take pride in the fact that my cuts are clean and my joints are tight. Because of my line of work, I own a 2016 Ford Transit 250 van. It is white. It is unglamorous. It has a tiny dent on the rear bumper from when I backed into a trash can in 2019, and it smells faintly of cedar sawdust and old coffee. It is not a luxury vehicle. It is a tool. It is my livelihood. I keep it meticulously maintained, washed every 2 weeks, and parked squarely in my own damn driveway. Now when you move to a place like Scottsdale, Arizona, you know you are making a deal with the devil. You get gorgeous sunsets, zero humidity, and landscaping that looks like it was manicured by a team of neurosurgeons. In exchange, you get the Homeowners Association. You get the CC&Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It is a thick, terrifying binder of rules dictating exactly how many inches your grass can grow. Right? What specific, soul-crushing shade of tan you are legally permitted to paint your garage door, and how long your trash cans can sit on the curb before you are declared an enemy of the state. I read the rules when I moved in. I agreed to them. I kept my yard clean, I didn't paint my house neon green, and I minded my own business. But then, Richard ascended to the throne. Richard is the president of the Desert Mirage Estates Homeowners Association Board of Directors. He is a retired middle management executive from some soul-sucking corporate logistics firm, and he has fully transitioned into his final form, a neighborhood dictator with way too much free time. Richard is the kind of guy who measures the distance between your mailbox and the curb with a retractable tape measure. He is the kind of guy who posts passive-aggressive missives on the neighborhood Facebook group about suspicious delivery drivers. He wears khaki shorts that are entirely too short. woven leather belts, and he patrols the neighborhood on a customized golf cart every evening at exactly 6:15 p.m., looking for infractions. For the first 2 years I lived here, Richard and I had an unspoken truce. I ignored his existence, and he couldn't find anything technically wrong with my property. I had heavy-duty magnetized signs on the side of my transit van that read, "Jack's Custom Woodwork," in a very classy, understated forest green font. The HOA rules stated that commercial vehicles could not be parked on the street overnight, so I parked my van in my driveway. Totally legal, totally compliant. Until 3 weeks ago. I came home on a Tuesday evening, exhausted after spending 10 hours wrestling a massive piece of raw edge walnut into a client's dining room, and found a stark white envelope taped to my front door. Not mailed, taped. With heavy-duty packing tape that left a sticky residue on my expensive mahogany door finish. I ripped it open. It was a formal notice from the HOA Board of Directors, signed with a flourish by Richard himself. It read, "Effective immediately, pursuant to the newly ratified Amendment Section 4, Paragraph B, of the Desert Mirage Estates CC and Rs, absolutely no commercial vehicles of any classification, size, or branding are permitted to be parked in residential driveways or upon the streets of this subdivision at any time. All commercial vehicles must be parked inside a closed garage or stored off-site at an approved commercial parking facility. Violations will result in immediate daily fines and the eventual towing of the offending vehicle at the owner's expense." I stared at the paper. I read it again. Then I looked at my van. My van is nearly 9 feet tall. I have a standard 7-foot garage door. Unless I was planning on greasing the roof and driving it in at 60 miles an hour to shave off the top 2 feet, that van was never, ever fitting inside my garage. And as for parking it off-site, the nearest approved commercial parking facility in this ritzy part of Scottsdale was a gated lot 3.5 miles away that charged $400 a month. I was furious. I marched straight into my house, opened my laptop, and pulled up the minutes from the last HOA board meeting, a meeting held on a Thursday at 10 a.m., a time when anyone with an actual job was, working. The minutes were a joke. Richard had introduced the amendment, citing numerous resident complaints regarding the deteriorating aesthetic quality of our streetscapes due to the intrusion of industrial machinery. He had pushed the vote through with the backing of his 2 cronies on the board, and buried in the notes was a specific, undeniable reference. Richard was quoted as saying, "We cannot have large branded work vans parked in plain sight. It turns our luxury community into a blue-collar loading dock." He was talking about me. I was the only person in the entire 70-home subdivision who drove a work van. He had drafted, proposed, and ratified an entire neighborhood ordinance specifically to target me and my livelihood, simply because he didn't like looking at a Ford Transit from his living room window. I took a deep breath. I told myself to calm down. I told myself to think logically. I am not a confrontational guy by nature. I prefer to fix things. So, I looked for a fix. The new rule specifically banned commercial vehicles and cited branding. I walked back outside into the warm night air. I walked up to the side of my van. I grabbed the edge of the large forest green Jack's Custom Woodwork magnetic sign, and I peeled it off. I walked around to the passenger side and peeled that one off too. Then I grabbed the smaller one off the back doors. I tossed all 3 heavy magnets into the corner of my garage. I stepped back and looked at my van. Without the signs, it was literally just a white Ford Transit. It had passenger windows in the back. It didn't have ladders strapped to the roof. It didn't have spinning orange hazard lights. It was just a large, white, aggressively boring automobile. Under Arizona state law, a commercial vehicle is defined by its registered weight, its use for transporting hazardous materials, or its design to transport more than 15 passengers. My van met none of those criteria. Without the branding, there was absolutely nothing distinguishing it from a large family vehicle or a recreational adventure van. Problem solved, right? A white van is just a white van. I went inside, drank a beer, and slept the sleep of a man who had successfully navigated a bureaucratic hurdle with simple, undeniable logic. I should have known better. You cannot use logic to defeat a man whose entire personality is built on a foundation of petty grievances. No tours. The next morning my alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. I brewed my coffee, loaded up my tool belt, and walked out my front door right as the sun was starting to peak over the McDowell Mountains, painting the desert sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. I took one sip of my coffee, looked toward my driveway, and froze. Tucked neatly under the driver's side windshield wiper of my unbranded, completely blank white van was a piece of paper, not a white envelope this time, a piece of bright, neon pink paper. It was glaringly obvious, designed to be seen by every single neighbor driving past. I walked over, yanked it out from under the wiper blade, and read it. Citation of violation, fine assessed, $500. Infraction, unauthorized parking of a commercial vehicle in a residential driveway. Second warning will result in towing. I felt my blood pressure spike so hard my vision actually blurred for a second. $500. For parking my own personal vehicle, in my own driveway, on property I pay a mortgage on. I spun around. Directly across the street, standing on his impossibly green, chemically treated lawn, was Richard. He was wearing a terry-cloth bathrobe, holding a brass garden hose nozzle, and watering a patch of petunias. He wasn't even looking at the flowers. He was staring directly at me. And he was smiling. It was this tight, smug, closed-mouth little smirk that radiated pure, unadulterated arrogance. I didn't think. I just moved. Anako, I practically jogged across the asphalt, the pink slip crushed in my fist. "Morning, Jack," Richard called out, his voice dripping with entirely fake, saccharine cheerfulness as I approached the curb. "Beautiful sunrise, isn't it?" "Richard," I said, my voice dangerously low. "What is this?" I held up the crumpled pink paper. He shut off the hose nozzle with a definitive click. "That, Jack, is a citation. I believe it's quite self-explanatory. You are in violation of the new community standards." "Community standards?" I demanded, gesturing back toward my driveway. "Look at the van, Richard. The signs are gone. There is no branding. It is not a commercial vehicle anymore. It's just a van. My personal van." Richard sighed. An exaggerated, theatrical sigh, like he was a weary schoolteacher explaining basic arithmetic to a particularly slow toddler. He casually draped the hose over a decorative boulder. "Jack, Jack, Jack," he said, shaking his head. "Taking the stickers off your work truck doesn't magically turn it into a Mercedes-Benz. We all know what you use that vehicle for. You transport tools. You drive it to construction sites. It is, by its very nature, an industrial vehicle. It ruins the aesthetic harmony of the streetscape." "Aesthetic harmony?" I barked. "It's a white car. It blends in with the beige houses perfectly. And furthermore, the law defines a commercial vehicle by weight and registration. This is registered as a personal vehicle, Richard. You can't just invent definitions because you don't like looking at it." Richard stepped closer to the edge of his lawn. The smug smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard look of absolute authority. "I don't care about state definitions, Jack," he said, his voice dropping the fake cheer. "I care about the Desert Mirage Estates covenants, and as the president of the board, I have the final say on the interpretation of those rules. Your van is a commercial vehicle in spirit. It represents blue-collar labor, and that is not the image this community projects. The fine stands. And if that eyesore isn't out of your driveway by Friday morning, I will have it towed at your expense. Have a wonderful day at work." He turned his back on me and walked toward his front door. "In spirit?" I yelled after him, absolutely flabbergasted by the sheer audacity of the phrase. Are you kidding me? If I put on running shoes, am I running a marathon in spirit? That doesn't even mean anything. He didn't turn around. He just waved a hand over his shoulder, opened his custom iron-wrought front door, and disappeared inside, leaving me standing on the curb with a $500 piece of pink paper in my hand. I walked slowly back to my driveway. I looked at the van. I looked at the pink slip. Commercial in spirit. He wasn't going to back down. He didn't care about the law. He didn't care about logic. And he certainly didn't care about my livelihood. He just wanted to win. He wanted to force me to submit to his arbitrary, made-up authority to prove that he controlled the neighborhood. If I paid the fine and parked the van 3 miles away, he won. If I fought the fine in HOA arbitration, a board entirely controlled by him, he won. Playing nice was over. Trying to fly under the radar was over. He wanted to use the rulebook to bleed me dry? Fine. But if there is one thing a custom carpenter knows how to do, it's how to measure twice, cut once, and find the absolute weakest structural point in a given framework. I didn't go to work that day. I called my clients, pushed back my installations, and brewed a massive pot of extremely strong coffee. I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and decided it was time to go nuclear. I spent the next 14 hours reading. I didn't just read the HOA CC&Rs. I read them line by agonizing line, looking for contradictions. Then I moved on to the City of Scottsdale municipal codes. I read zoning ordinances, parking regulations, vehicle classification parameters, and residential property statutes. My eyes were burning, my back was aching, and my kitchen table was covered in highlighters, printed PDFs, and empty coffee mugs. By 2 a.m., I was delirious. I had found a few minor things, like the fact that Richard's decorative boulder was technically 3 inches over the property line, but nothing that would save my van from being towed on Friday. I was about to give up. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples, and stared at the ceiling. How do you legally make a vehicle untouchable? I thought. Diplomatic immunity? Impractical. Handicap registry? Fraudulent. What is completely non-notoire, federally protected from being messed with by petty local authorities. I started typing random, desperate queries into the search bar. Federal protections for vehicles. Exceptions to local parking ordinances. Vehicles exempt from HOA rules. And then, deep within a rabbit hole of municipal case law regarding parade floats and street performers, I struck absolute, unadulterated gold. I found 2 distinct pieces of information that, when combined, I formed a weapon of mass bureaucratic destruction so potent I actually started laughing out loud in my empty kitchen. First, I found a deeply buried, incredibly specific municipal exemption in the Scottsdale City Code. The city hosts an annual, quirky arts festival called the Scottsdale Satire Fest, essentially a massive, chaotic parade of art cars and rolling installations. To encourage participation, the City Council had passed an ordinance stating that any vehicle officially registered as a temporary float or mobile art installation for a sanctioned municipal parade is granted a temporary 60-day exemption from all local residential parking restrictions regarding vehicle appearance, class, or aesthetic modification. That was step 1. If I registered the van for the parade, the city couldn't touch me. But the HOA still could. The HOA rules were a private contract, and they often superseded city codes on private property. But they do not supersede federal law. And that brought me to the greatest piece of legislation ever passed by the United States Congress, the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. VARA, as it is known to copyright lawyers and absolute menaces like myself, is a federal law that grants moral rights to artists regarding their work. It states that if a piece of visual art, a painting, a sculpture, A mural achieves recognized stature. It is federally protected. The creator of that artwork has the absolute legal right to prevent any intentional distortion, mutilation, or modification of that artwork. And more importantly, they have the right to prevent the destruction of a work of recognized stature. I sat up straight, my heart hammering against my ribs. I read the statute again. I read case law. I read lawsuits where landlords had tried to paint over graffiti murals on their own buildings and had been sued for hundreds of thousands of dollars under VARA. The legal precedent was crystal clear. If a vehicle is merely a canvas for a federally protected work of art, forcing the owner to paint over it, alter it, or tow it in a way that risks damaging the art is a direct violation of federal law. The artist, not the vehicle owner, but the artist, can sue the offending party for statutory damages of up to $150,000 per violation in federal court. Richard didn't want a commercial vehicle in my driveway. He didn't want a white van. Fine. He wasn't going to get one. He was going to get a commissioned, federally protected, mobile public art installation. And if he or his little towing company even breathed on it, I was going to drop a federal lawsuit on his balding head that would bankrupt the entire Desert Mirage Estates Homeowners Association. But there was a catch. I couldn't just finger paint a smiley face on the hood and call it art. To trigger VARA protections, the art had to be created by an actual artist, and it had to have recognized stature. I needed someone with a portfolio. I needed someone legitimate. And given the fact that Richard had threatened my livelihood, fined me $500, and ruined my week, I needed someone whose artistic vision was aggressively, obnoxiously, undeniably offensive to the delicate sensibilities of a retired middle manager. I needed a weirdo. I spent the next day making phone calls. I reached out to local galleries in downtown Phoenix, asking for muralists. I got a lot of polite rejections. "I only work on brick," one said. "A van is too derivative," said another. Then, a gallery owner laughed and gave me a phone number. "You want someone to deface a van to piss off an HOA in Scottsdale? Call Sven. He's going to love this." I called Sven. Sven arrived at my house the next morning. He drove a battered 1998 Volvo station wagon filled to the roof with spray paint cans, drop cloths, and what looked like a dismantled mannequin. He stepped out of the car. He was about 6'4", incredibly thin, wearing paint-splattered overalls with no shirt underneath. And he had a massive, chaotic beard that looked like it contained several lost birds. "You're the guy with the canvas?" he asked. His voice was deep, raspy, and accented with something I couldn't quite place. "I'm Jack," I said, shaking his hand. He had paint under every single fingernail. "And yes, the van is the canvas." I led him to the driveway. We stood in front of the blinding white Ford Transit. "So," Sven said, pulling a crushed pack of cigarettes from his overalls. "Tell me the vision. Why are we painting a perfectly good work truck?" I told him everything. I told him about Richard. I told him about the commercial in spirit comment. I told him about the $500 fine, the threat to tow, and the absolute tyranny of the Desert Mirage Estates CC&Rs. As I spoke, Sven's eyes lit up. A slow, wicked grin spread across his face, hidden partially by the massive beard. He didn't just understand the assignment, he felt it in his soul. "An HOA," Sven whispered, the words dripping with pure venom. "I despise them. They are the death of culture. They are the sanitization of the human experience." He pointed a long, bony finger at Richard's house across the street. "That man is an architect of beige despair." "Exactly," I said. "Which is why I want to hit him with the Visual Artists' Rights Act. I have registered this van as a temporary float for the Scottsdale Satire Fest next month. That gives me city clearance. But to trap the HOA, I need this van to be a documented, signed piece of art by a recognized muralist. If they tow it, they destroy the art. If they destroy the art, we sue them in federal court. Sven took a long drag of his cigarette. I have murals in 3 different state capitals. I have pieces in modern art museums in Berlin. I am very recognized. He looked back at the van. I will do this for the cost of the paint. The destruction of a petty tyrant's ego is the only compensation I require. Deal, I said. So, what do we paint? Sven started pacing around the van, his hands waving in the air as he visualized the space. We need something that is the absolute antithesis of their aesthetic. We need something that mocks their fear, their paranoia, their desperate need to control their environment. They called this a commercial vehicle. They think it's dangerous to their property values. He stopped, turning to face me. What is the most universally terrifying, inappropriately hilarious, deeply unsettling thing you can possibly put on the side of a windowless white van? We stared at each other for a long moment. And then, simultaneously, the realization hit us. No, I said, putting a hand over my mouth. We can't. Yes, Sven whispered, his eyes wide with maniacal joy. We absolutely must. It's too much. The cops will actually arrest me. It is satire, Sven declared, throwing his arms wide. It is a poignant commentary on suburban paranoia. It is protected speech. It is protected art. And it is going to make that man across the street soil his khaki shorts. I looked at Richard's pristine beige house. I thought about the $500 fine. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the phrase commercial in spirit. Do it, I said. Make it horrifying. Over the next 3 days, my driveway became an active construction site of avant-garde terror. Sven erected a makeshift tent over the van to keep the sun off his work, and he painted from sunrise to sunset. The sheer level of detail he was putting into the piece was astounding. He wasn't just throwing up graffiti, he was creating a high-definition, hyper-realistic masterpiece of absolute nightmare fuel. I checked on him on day 2. He was standing on a step stool, using an airbrush to add shading to a terrifyingly realistic razor-toothed clown face plastered across the sliding side door. The clown was holding a bundle of balloons, but instead of balloons, they were rusted circular saw blades. Sven, I said a little breathlessly, that is really something. Wait until you see the lettering, he cackled, not looking away from his work. By the afternoon of day 3, it was finished. Sven collapsed the tent, packed up his station wagon, and asked me to step outside for the grand reveal. I walked out of my garage and stopped dead in my tracks. The white van was gone. In its place was a rolling monument to suburban terror. The entire driver's side of the van, the side that faced directly out into the street, completely visible from Richard's front window, was dominated by a massive, dripping, carnival-style banner painted in neon blood red and sickly yellow. The banner read, in letters 3 feet high, "Free Candy." Beneath the lettering, bursting out of a realistically painted, rusted-out metal vortex, were 3 distinct, horrific clowns. They weren't cartoonish. They looked like they had been painted by a Renaissance master who had lost his mind in a haunted house. They were reaching out with elongated fingers, offering oversized, menacingly shiny lollipops. The background was a swirling void of dark purple and black, with subtle, hidden details painted into the shadows, eyeballs, creepy dolls, and what looked remarkably like a caricature of Richard himself, cowering in a corner. But the pièce de résistance was on the rear doors. Sven had painted a hyper-realistic optical illusion of the doors being slightly ajar, revealing a pitch-black interior. And staring out from that painted darkness were dozens of glowing yellow eyes. Right below the door handle, in thick, stylized script, Sven had signed his name and the date, sealing the trap. "It is magnificent," Sven said, wiping a tear from his eye. "I call it the spirit of commerce. Do you like it?" I was speechless. It was the ugliest, most offensive, a most brilliant thing I had ever seen. It was a masterpiece of malicious compliance. It technically possessed absolutely zero corporate branding. It did not advertise Jack's custom woodwork. It was, by all municipal and federal definitions, a private art installation. "Sven," I said, handing him an envelope containing the cost of the paint and a massive tip. "You are a genius. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go park my car." I got into the driver's seat. I started the engine. "Don't." I pulled out of the driveway, turned around in the cul-de-sac, and backed the van up perfectly aligning it so that the massive, terrifying free candy sign and the central clown were making direct, unimpeded, unblinking eye contact with Richard's living room window. I turned off the engine. I stepped out, locked the doors, and walked up to my front porch. I pulled up a lawn chair, sat down with a glass of iced tea, and waited for the explosion. It took exactly 14 minutes. 14 minutes. Literally, that is all it took. I honestly thought it would take him at least an hour to finish his little golf cart patrol, but I guess the sheer localized density of the horrifying clown aura I had installed in my driveway acted like some sort of homing beacon for his petty, bureaucratic instincts. I was sitting on my porch, right? Just chilling in this cheap plastic Adirondack chair I got from Home Depot, a glass of iced tea sweating onto the armrest. The neighborhood was dead quiet. Just the hum of central air conditioning units and the occasional chirp of a desert bird trying not to burst into flames. Then, I heard it. The squeak of the custom wrought iron hinges on Richard's front door across the street. The door didn't just open, it was shoved open so hard it literally bounced off the beige stucco wall. Richard stepped out onto his pristine front porch. He was wearing the exact same pastel yellow polo shirt and aggressively short khaki shorts from the day before, like some sort of uniform for the HOA police. He had a clipboard tucked under one arm. He looked down at his clipboard, checked his watch, and then looked up toward my house, presumably to bask in the glory of my empty, vanless driveway. I watched his eyes track across the asphalt. I watched them land on the side of my van. It was like watching a computer try to process a command that didn't exist. He just stopped. He froze entirely. His jaw actually physically dropped. The clipboard slipped from under his arm and clattered onto the concrete porch, the metal clip making a sharp clack that echoed down the street. From my angle, I could perfectly see the reflection of Sven's masterpiece in Richard's large front windows. The massive, bleeding yellow letters spelling out free candy. The hyper-realistic, rusted saw blades, and the central clown leaning out of the painted metallic void, staring directly into Richard's soul with dead yellow eyes. Richard's face went from its usual sun-baked pink to a stark, terrifying shade of plum purple. He took one step off his porch, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He pointed a trembling, spotted finger at the van. He looked at me, sitting on my porch, raising my iced tea in a silent, sarcastic toast. He didn't yell. He didn't come across the street. He simply spun around, marched back into his house, and slammed the door so hard I saw his front window rattle. I mean, I knew he was calling the cops. Obviously. That was the whole point. You don't put a murder clown mural on a work van in a gated Scottsdale community unless you are fully prepared to deal with municipal law enforcement. I took another sip of my tea, pulled a thick manila folder out from under my chair, and waited. 5 minutes later, the wail of sirens cut through the suburban silence. Not one, but two Scottsdale Police Department cruisers came screeching around the corner of Desert Mirage Boulevard. They didn't even use their turn signals. They just bumped up over the low curb, their red and blue lights flashing frantically, washing the pale beige houses in a strobe light disco of sheer panic. The cruiser slammed into park right in front of my house, blocking the street entirely. 4 doors flew open almost simultaneously. The cops practically leaped out, hands resting instinctively on their heavy black duty belts. And then they saw the van. It was honestly the funniest thing I have ever witnessed in my entire life. The lead officer, a tall, stocky guy with a buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses, stopped so abruptly his partner nearly rear-ended him on foot. The officer literally took his sunglasses off, letting them hang from his tactical vest, just so he could stare at the side of my van with his bare eyes. "What in the actual?" I heard the partner mutter, his voice carrying perfectly across the hot asphalt. Before the cops could even process the rolling nightmare parked in my driveway, Richard came sprinting out of his house. And I do mean sprinting. I didn't know a man in his late 60s wearing woven leather boat shoes could move that fast. "Officers! Officers!" Richard screamed, waving his arms frantically as he dashed across the street. "Thank God you're here! Look at it!" Just look at it." The lead officer turned to Richard, looking incredibly annoyed that his viewing of the murder clowns had been interrupted. "Sir, please stay on the sidewalk. Did you call this in?" "Yes, I called it in." Richard was practically hyperventilating, pointing a shaking finger at my van. "It's a commercial vehicle, and it's a threat to the community. It says free candy. There are children in this neighborhood. It's an obvious entrapment hazard. It's an aesthetic violation. And it's parked illegally." I decided this was my cue. I casually stood up, smoothed down my t-shirt, picked up my manila folder, and ambled down the driveway. I made sure to walk incredibly slowly. "Morning, officers," I said, offering a polite, easygoing smile. "Can I help you guys with something?" The second cop, a younger guy who looked like he was fighting the absolute hardest battle of his life to keep a straight face, looked at me, then back at the van. "Sir, is this your vehicle?" "It sure is," I said proudly, patting the hood. "Just got her painted. What do you think? The artist calls it the spirit of commerce." It's a bold statement on the decay of suburban innocence, I guess. Richard let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. "It is a commercial work van. He is trying to mock the homeowners association. He was ordered to remove his commercial vehicle, and instead he defaced it with pornography." "Richard," I sighed, shaking my head. "It's not pornography, it's a clown. Honestly, if you're turned on by that, we have a whole different set of problems we need to unpack." The younger cop disguised a snort as a cough and turned his head away. The lead officer held up a hand. "Okay, everyone just take a breath, sir," he said, looking at me. "Your neighbor here is claiming this is an illegally parked commercial vehicle, and frankly, putting free candy on a windowless van is a profoundly terrible idea. Tyrone, what exactly is going on here?" "I completely agree, officer," I said smoothly. "It is a terrible idea for a commercial vehicle, but as you can see, there is absolutely zero branding on this van. No company name, no phone number, no LLC. Ergo, it is not a commercial vehicle." "It's a trick!" Richard shrieked. "He uses it for carpentry. I've seen the saws." "I use my kitchen knives to cut chicken, Richard. That doesn't make my house a commercial slaughterhouse," I shot back. I turned back to the cops. "Officers, this vehicle is not being used for commerce. It is, in fact, an officially registered mobile art installation and temporary parade float." Both cops just stared at me. "A what?" the lead officer asked. I opened my manila folder. I love paperwork. I literally, genuinely love the moment when a beautifully executed piece of municipal bureaucracy slides into place. "A parade float," I repeated, pulling out a crisp, city-stamped document. "As you are likely aware, the city of Scottsdale is hosting the Satire Fest Art Parade next month. Under Municipal Code Section 12, Paragraph 4, Any vehicle officially registered as a temporary float for a sanctioned city parade is granted a 60-day exemption from all local residential parking restrictions regarding vehicle appearance, class, or aesthetic modification. I handed the permit to the lead officer. He took it, read it, and frowned. "I mean, it's got the city clerk's stamp on it," the officer said, showing it to his partner. "That doesn't matter," Richard yelled, his face now transitioning from plum purple to an alarming shade of crimson. "The HOA CC&Rs supersede city parade ordinances on private property. It's in the bylaws. I have the authority to tow any vehicle that violates the aesthetic harmony of the streetscape, and I am ordering you to tow this monstrosity immediately." "Actually," I interrupted, raising a single finger, "you really don't want to do that, Richard." I reached into the folder and pulled out the second document. The heavy artillery. The affidavit from Sven. "Officers, if Mr. Richard here attempts to tow this vehicle, or if he attempts to force me to paint over it, he will be committing a federal offense. And honestly, I don't think his HOA insurance policy covers federal copyright violations." The younger cop raised an eyebrow. "Federal offense? In tow? Over a clown van?" "Over a recognized work of visual art," I corrected him, handing over the affidavit. "Have you gentlemen ever heard of the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990? They shook their heads. "It's a fascinating piece of federal legislation," I said, putting on my best, most obnoxious professor voice. "VARA grants artists moral rights to their work. If an artwork achieves recognized stature, the artist has the absolute, federally protected right to prevent any intentional distortion, mutilation, or destruction of that artwork." I pointed to the elaborate, stylized signature Sven had painted near the back bumper. "This mural was commissioned by me, but it was painted and signed by Sven Jorgensen, a recognized muralist with pieces in 3 state capitals and a modern art museum in Berlin. This document is his sworn affidavit declaring this van to be a work of recognized stature. If the HOA tows this van, they risk scratching it. If they force me to paint over it, they destroy it. Under VARA, the artist, not me, but the artist, can sue the offending party for statutory damages of up to $150,000 per violation." I looked directly at Richard. His mouth was still open, but no sound was coming out. "So," I said, smiling sweetly, "if you want to call a tow truck, Richard, go right ahead. But the second that hook touches my bumper, I am calling Sven's lawyer. And we are going to bankrupt the Desert Mirage Estates Homeowners Association by Tuesday." The silence on the street was deafening. The only sound was the low rumble of the police cruiser's engines and the distant whir of a lawnmower. The lead officer slowly handed the paperwork back to me. He looked at Richard. He looked at the van. And then, the professional composure completely broke. A massive ear-to-ear grin spread across the cop's face. "Well, Mr. President," the officer said to Richard. "2-1," chuckling openly now. "It looks like you've got yourself a federally protected clown van. This is entirely a civil matter. There is no crime being committed here, no city ordinances being broken, and frankly, we don't enforce HOA bylaws, especially not when it involves federal art statutes." You can't just leave it," Richard stammered, looking frantically between the cops and the van. "It's hideous. It's a menace." "Sir," the younger cop said, climbing back into the driver's seat of the cruiser, "it's not a crime to own an ugly van. Have a wonderful rest of your day." The cops got back into their cars, turned off their flashing lights, and slowly drove away, leaving Richard standing in the middle of the street, completely and utterly defeated by a legal loophole he couldn't even comprehend. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I just gave him a little 2-finger salute, picked up my iced tea, and walked back up to my porch. But of course, a guy like Richard doesn't just give up. His entire identity is tied to his ability to control his environment. By 4 p.m. the next day, a certified letter was taped to my door. It was a summons. An emergency mandatory meeting of the Desert Mirage Estates HOA Board of Directors, scheduled for that evening at the community clubhouse. The sole item on the agenda: the immediate remediation of the vehicular nuisance at Lot 42. I spent the afternoon printing out copies of the VARA legislation, binding them in nice little presentation folders. I even printed out a few articles about previous VARA lawsuits where landlords had been completely financially ruined for painting over graffiti. I wanted to make sure the presentation was flawless. At 7 p.m., I strolled into the community clubhouse. Tota, the place smelled exactly like you'd expect. Heavy chlorine from the adjacent pool, stale generic brand coffee, and the suffocating scent of cheap potpourri. The board was sitting behind a long, folding plastic table at the front of the room. Richard was in the center, looking like he hadn't slept in 2 days. To his left was Brenda, the HOA secretary, a woman who communicated entirely through aggressive sighing and passive-aggressive post-it notes. To his right was Gary, the HOA treasurer, a nervous-looking retired accountant who always looked like he was one loud noise away from a stress-induced heart attack. A few busybody neighbors had shown up to watch the execution. I took a seat in the front row, placed my heavy stack of folders on my lap, and crossed my arms. Richard banged a little wooden gavel on the plastic table. It sounded pathetic. "This emergency meeting of the board is now called to order," Richard announced, his voice tight and reedy. He glared at me. "We are here to address the unprecedented, vulgar, and frankly psychotic display currently parked in Jack's driveway. Jack, you were issued a citation and given a directive to remove your commercial vehicle. Instead, you have escalated the situation by defacing the vehicle with offensive imagery intended to terrorize this community." "Richard, honestly, I don't know why you're so upset," I said, not standing up. "You told me you didn't want a commercial vehicle. I listened to you. I took the signs off. Then you told me the white van was commercial in spirit. So I took the spirit out of it. Now it's a privately commissioned avant-garde art piece. It's a cultural asset to the neighborhood." Brenda let out a dramatic, shuddering sigh. "It says free candy with bleeding letters, Jack. Susan from down the street said her golden retriever won't even walk past your house anymore." "Dogs don't understand English, Brenda," I replied flatly. "And if they do, we have a much bigger, much more lucrative situation on our hands than an HOA dispute." "Enough!" Richard slammed his hand on the table. "This ends tonight. We are voting on a resolution to immediately authorize a heavy-duty towing company to enter your property, remove the vehicle, and store it at a secure facility until you pay for the removal of the offensive paint. And we will be assessing a $1,000 fine for community endangerment." He looked incredibly smug. He looked like he had finally boxed me in. I stood up. I walked up to the folding table and gently placed 3 identical presentation folders down. One in front of Richard, one in front of Brenda, and one in front of Gary. "Before you vote, guys, I really think you need to review the documentation I've provided. Specifically, Gary. Gary, you're the treasurer, right? You manage the HOA reserve funds?" Gary adjusted his glasses, looking nervously at the folder. "Yes, that is my purview." "Great." "Open the folder, Gary." I stepped back and shoved my hands into my pockets. "What you are looking at is a sworn affidavit from a recognized, internationally exhibited artist named Sven Jorgensen. He is the creator of the mural on my van. You will also find the full text of the Federal Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. Richard rolled his eyes. "We already went over this with the police, Jack. You can't just invent federal protections." "I didn't invent them. Congress did," I shot back. "And federal judges take them very, very seriously. Under VARA, an artist has the legal right to sue anyone who destroys, distorts, or alters a recognized work of art. The statutory damages, meaning the minimum penalty they can slap you with just for doing it, are up to $150,000 per violation." I leaned over the table, looking directly at Gary. Gary, if Richard orders a tow truck to drag my van out of the driveway, and that tow truck driver puts a single scratch on one of those clowns, Sven Jorgensen will sue the HOA in federal court. If you order me to paint over it, and I refuse, and you try to hire someone to do it, you are authorizing the destruction of federal art. That's a $150,000 lawsuit, plus attorney fees, plus punitive damages. I paused, letting the numbers hang in the stale, potpourri-scented air. Gary, I asked softly, how much money does the Desert Mirage Estates HOA currently have in its emergency legal reserve fund? Gary's face had gone completely, chalky white. He looked down at the VARA documents, tracing the lines of text with a shaking finger. He swallowed hard. $12,400, Gary whispered. Right, I said, clapping my hands together once. So you're about $137,000 short of being able to afford Richard's little towing field trip. If Sven sues, the HOA goes bankrupt. When the HOA goes bankrupt, a judge will order a special assessment. Do you know what that means? Brenda! Brenda was staring at me in absolute horror. It means, I continued, that the court will force every single homeowner in this subdivision to pay out of pocket to cover the lawsuit. Everyone's monthly dues will skyrocket. The neighborhood will be financially ruined, all because Richard couldn't handle looking at a white Ford Transit. I looked back at Richard. He was staring at the folder like it was a live grenade. The smugness was completely gone, replaced by a panicked, desperate realization that he had walked blindly into a trap of his own making. You're bluffing, Richard croaked, but there was no conviction in his voice. No judge would uphold this. I've included 4 distinct case law precedents in tab 3, Richard, I said smoothly. Read them. Landlords sued for painting over graffiti. Building owners sued for moving sculptures. It happens all the time. Are you willing to bet the financial solvency of the entire neighborhood on the chance that a federal judge hates clowns as much as you do? Gary didn't even hesitate. He slammed his folder shut and slid it away from him like it was radioactive. I withdraw my support for the towing resolution, Gary said loudly, his voice echoing in the quiet clubhouse. I am not authorizing HOA funds for a tow truck, and I will not be a party to a federal lawsuit. Gary, Richard hissed, looking betrayed. He's right, Richard, Brenda chimed in, suddenly finding her voice. She looked at Richard with absolute disgust. This is insane. You escalated this because you didn't like his work van? Now we have a nightmare clown float parked on Elm Street and a federal lawsuit hanging over our heads. I vote no. Just like that, the mutiny was complete. In less than 3 minutes, the tyrant had been overthrown by his own sycophants, entirely motivated by the sheer, unadulterated terror of financial ruin. So, what's the play here, guys? I asked, leaning casually against the wall. Because I've got a city permit for that parade float for the next 60 days. I can leave it exactly how it is until then. Or we can make a deal. Gary looked up at me, practically begging. What kind of deal? You immediately draft a highly specific variance to the Commercial Vehicle Amendment, a variance that officially permits one, and only one, unbranded, white Ford Transit 250 to be parked in the driveway of Lot 42, indefinitely. You waive the $500 fine. You put it in writing, signed by the entire board tonight. In exchange, I will get Sven to sign a waiver authorizing the destruction of his art, and I will personally power wash the clowns off my van by tomorrow afternoon. The board didn't even need to vote. Gary already had a pen out. The aftermath was glorious. Not only did I get my perfectly legal, unbranded white van back in my driveway, completely immune to the HOA bylaws, but the sheer humiliation of the clown incident broke Richard's grip on the neighborhood. The story spread like wildfire. Homeowners who had been silently suffering under his tape measure tyranny realized he wasn't invincible. He was just a bully who could be defeated by a guy with a paintbrush and a Wi-Fi connection. Within 2 weeks, Richard officially resigned as president of the board of directors, citing health reasons and a desire to spend more time focusing on his petunias. As for the van, I kept my end of the bargain. I got the waiver from Sven. He thought the whole thing was the funniest piece of performance art he had ever participated in. And I spent 4 hours with a heavy-duty pressure washer blasting the free candy mural down the storm drain. But I didn't wash it all off. If you walk up to my van today, go around to the back right bumper, right near the tailpipe, and look closely. You'll see a tiny 2-inch square of paint that I carefully taped off before I washed the rest. It's just a single glowing yellow eye, staring out from the white paint. A little reminder to the neighborhood that if you try to use the rulebook to crush me, I won't just fight back. I will rewrite the rulebook, paint it neon red, and park it right in your driveway. Have fun with this one. It's a ride.